everyone, my name is Chelsea and welcome back to my channel. For today's video, we have February's wrap up. Today we are just going to do my stats and wrap up. I will have a slightly big book haul coming in the next video, so we are splitting it up. But we're going to jump into everything that I read in February. One thing that I will first mention is I actually read one extra book in February after filming my March TBR. So the book pot that I'm saving $1 for every book that I read is gonna have $1 more put in there, so when we come back for April's TBR, we will have an extra $1 in there. I'm just gonna say that now. We're gonna talk about all the books that I read, but since filming the TBR video and this one, I ended up reading one more book. So let's get into it. I will have stats over here, and in the month of February, I read 13 books. This is the exact same number as January, and I had one DNF, which is the exact same as January so far. So far so good for book number wise reading. Page number, on the other hand, went down a little bit. Apparently the books that I was reading didn't have as many pages, so this month I had 3,543 pages. But I did listen to more audiobooks, and when I track audiobooks, I do actually do the page number here too. So I was listening to more audiobooks than in January, but the page number was still lower. This month, in February, I listened to 15.2 hours, whereas in January it was only like 7.2. So I definitely doubled, more than doubled, the amount of audiobooks I listened to in the month. Now let's go down to the reading method. I had 4 audiobooks, 5 physical books, and 4 ebooks, so a pretty even spread. And going into the genre, the top genre I had for February was fantasy with 4 books. I also had 3 romances, 2 contemporaries, 2 sci-fis, 1 horror, and 1 non-fiction. And for the book format, 10 of them were novels, 2 were graphic novels, and 1 was a manga. As for if it was indie or traditional, 3 of them were indie published or self-published, and 10 of them were traditionally published. So that's a better jump from last month. How I got it. Okay, this was a little bit all over the board, but 5 of them were from my owned TBR. 3 of them I borrowed from the library. These would obviously be audiobooks. 1 was an advanced reader copy or an ARC. 1 was a book that I bought this year in 2024. 1 was a book that was a reread for me, so one that I've read before. I am tracking them separately versus my owned TBR this year. 1 was a book that was gifted to me, and 1 was a book that I borrowed from Kindle Unlimited. Now let's jump into the age category. I was again all over the board with this, which I'm actually very happy about. I read 5 adult titles, 1 new adult title, 5 young adult titles, and 2 middle grades. So now we're going to jump into the star rating. I was very pleasantly surprised by my reading in February because I had no 5-star reads in January. My reading just felt mediocre, even though I did have some like 4s. This month was much better. So I had 1 DNF, 1 2-star, 1 3-star, 4 4-stars, 1 4.5-star, and 5 5-star reads. And so for the month of February, this is actually giving me an average of 3.96. Almost hitting a 4-star average. Like I said, I did have some pretty good reads in the month of February. So those are all the stats we have here. We're now going to run through all of the books that I read in the month, going from my DNF to my favorite book of the month. So the book that I DNF'd is The Midnight Prince by Angie Grigoleonis. This is a book that was indie published. I had it on my TBR. I started reading it like February 3rd. Like I thought I was being on top of it. It's only 200 pages. This is pretty much purely a case of it's not the book, it's me. There was just stuff in it that I wasn't really enjoying. I found myself thinking, oh, this is gonna be a 3-star read, and then not wanting to pick it up and realizing like even though I thought it wasn't bad, it was probably going to be a pretty solid 3-star. If I'm not really into it, if I'm not thinking it's going to be amazing, why am I still thinking I'm trying to read it? Because I wasn't. It took me until the very end of the month to be like, you know what, I don't think I'm actually going to read this. I got 110 pages in. I got over 50% in, and it just wasn't really for me. This is supposed to be a Cinderella sort of retelling, and it's very loosely based on that. Like, there is a ball, but I didn't really see the Cinderella elements as much as I would like to. The writing is pretty good. Like, as soon as I started reading it, I thought I was really going to enjoy it. This does have fae and magic in the world. My biggest issues personally were the fact that we had characters that knew each other before this story starts. So our prince character and our like Cinderella character had a whole romance and stuff off page before this story starts, so we didn't really get to experience that. And then they're not together when this book starts, because this is sort of like a second chance romance Cinderella story, but the reason they need a second chance romance is because of some sort of magical miscommunication, and I do not like miscommunication for the sake of miscommunication. And I know it's magical and there's probably a specific reason, but I just was like, I don't really care as much as I should. So again, I'm sure some people are absolutely going to love this. It was just not for me. Okay, so we're gonna move into my 2-star read. This was The White and Blue Between Us by Kiyuhiko. This was an arc, and I read it before the release date. I semi-buddy read it with Kirsty from K-Beth Bookish because she heard me talk about this before I read it and decided, hey, I'm gonna see if NetGalley will let me borrow it as well. She did, and then we were like, let's read it and talk about it. And we both had some thoughts about this. I gave it a 2 because I really reserve my 1 stars, especially for like things that I absolutely hate, or for on my stats, the DNFs. I really did not like this book, but most of it was because there was no good character or relationship development. This is a boys love, and they do market it that way, boys love manga, male-male romance sort of thing, and it's again supposed to be second chance. Second chance is not my favorite trope, and I know this, and so I should stop requesting these kind of books, but I was hoping for something good because it's like these boys met in high school and they had a sort of relationship, and then something happens and they break up and go their separate ways, and now they're adults and they come back together. The thing is, the reason for the breakup was one boy lying to the other, saying that they didn't want to be in love anymore, or they were never in love with them, and like really breaking his heart, and I don't understand why. There was no real explanation as to why, and then he comes back to town and is like almost forcing himself into the boy's life again. I say boy, they're adults now. Forcing himself into his life again, even though the other one is like, do not talk to me, I don't want to do this. So like we just never really got a good romance development, a good character development. And then this did have the sort of non-con, dub-con scenes that I do find some boys love, the ones that specifically say boys love, have in them that I do not enjoy, because I don't like the idea of like, I'm able to force myself on you and then you're gonna love me. Like, that is just not what I'm here for. I think I've been spoiled a little bit too much with the like YA LGBTQ finding themselves mangas that are out here nowadays that are so sweet and lovable, and you really get to see the romance, that like I draw the line at those dub-con, non-con scenes because we don't 100% know if it's like actual rape, but it reads that way, you know what I mean? And so yeah, I did not like this one. Moving into my 3-star, I have The Restaurant at the End of the Universe by Douglas Adams. This was a reread for me. I'm reading this for the Hitchhiker's Read Along, and this is the last book in this series that I've actually read before, and I think that's part of the reason I never continued, is that I gave this a 3-star, and I gave it a 3-star specifically because there are some things I absolutely love and some things I absolutely hate. This is one of those 3 stars that isn't because it's mediocre or forgettable, it's because I am at total both ends of the spectrum with this book. I absolutely love the Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy movie, and I really did enjoy the first book in this series, but the second book takes us to a completely different area with random stuff happening. And yes, I know this is very like weird and funny and satire and stuff like that, but a lot of it just didn't feel like it was moving any sort of plot forward. It had characters that were very unlikable, or it had scenes that were way too long. I will say the ending of book 2 brings us about in a circular fashion from book 1, and I really like the idea of where it's going, but it doesn't have a full conclusion. And the parts that I loved the most in here were the actual like Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy parts, the parts that are very weird and funny about planets and stuff in the universes and like all of that kind of stuff. I really like those and want more of it, whereas like the actual storyline and plot aren't really happening. Don't get me started on the characters either. Trillian, who is an interesting character from book 1, although not albeit in it very much, has basically no lines in book 2. Doesn't even feel like a real character. She's also like the only female in this story. So like I need people to do better with her in book 3, please. Moving into my 4 stars, I actually have 4 of them. The first one I have here is The Spirit Bares Its Teeth by Andrew Joseph White. I actually talked about this in like Booktube's best books of 2023. I did like a vlog reading some of my Booktube friends' favorite books from last year, and this one I gave a 4. Mostly because some of it is just very uncomfortable, and it's not in a bad way, it's just in a way that this is definitely like YA horror, and there's some very graphic medical terminology and body horror, and specifically our main character in here is trans, but this is set in like the 1800s when this is not really a thing that people are allowed to do, and we definitely get a lot of the body dysmorphia that they are feeling, and so it's just the feelings of unease in here were really getting to me. Besides that though, I really did enjoy this story. It's just one of those things that is very heavy, and I've heard Andrew Joseph White's first book had that kind of stuff even more. I think that's like a Hell Followed Through Us or With Us. So I don't even know if I'm gonna necessarily be the person that wants to read that, because I did appreciate this for what it was. I thought it was a very interesting sort of magic system and thing, which is not like even like the main big part of this story, but like it was so interesting, but it was just so dark and uncomfortable. So like the vibes of this were just, yeah. My next 4-star was An Enchantment of Ravens by Margaret Rogerson. This is a book that like I do appreciate. I listened to it on audiobook. The narrator was amazing for that. But like I loved Sorcery of Thorns, like 5 out of 5 stars. I loved the characters. I loved the world. I loved how all of that came together. And this one has a much more flowery writing style, very poetic. It makes sense because our main character is a painter, and so she does have a lot of simile and metaphor for the things that she describes. Not my favorite writing style, but I did appreciate it in this setting. My biggest thing with this is just the whole like fae romance and things like that. Didn't feel like I had enough of it to come together. Like it was very quick to get into those pieces. And then also our main character talks about the fae as like they do this and they do this. It's like very factual and a little bit condescending, like she's very judgy, and because of that, this whole persona that our main character puts on around the fae, I really don't understand how we're supposed to believe some of the other character relationships in this story. Like I do understand that like she is not 100% wrong about the fae, but I just wish there was a little bit more development of that. Like it was very good, very enjoyable read, just not like my favorite thing. Then another 4-star is The Accidental Apprentice by Amanda Foody. This is the first book in the Wilder Lore series that is a middle grade fantasy series. This actually was another of Ashley from Bookish Realms like favorite books of 2023, and I wanted to read it for the vlog that I did. However, I didn't get it from the library until after. I put the request in during the filming of that vlog and didn't get it until after, but I listened to this on audiobook and I really enjoyed this one. This follows our main character of Barkley, who is from the Elsewheres, the places that don't have lore or magic, and on an accident goes into the forest that he's not really supposed to go into, and like accidentally bonds with a beast who is what like gives the people their lore and their magic, and they can do abilities with that. And so he gets sucked into this world of lore and the beasts and the monsters, and there is like a magical competition in this book, and it was really fun to start off with and see this like fantasy world and Barkley trying to figure this out, because he had always been told that beasts and lore were bad. He is an orphan, so it's easier for him to sort of like start to create friends and things in this world that is like completely different than what he's used to. One of my issues with this is that I listened to it on audiobook, and the narrator has such a deep voice. He is like such a man, and this is supposed to be a 12-year-old boy, and so I had a hard time with the audiobook that way. Like I don't particularly like boys being narrated by deep voiced men. But besides that, it was a very solid first book in a middle grade fantasy series, so I did give it a 4, and I want to continue in this series. My last 4-star is Say You'll Be Mine by Naina Kumar. This is my book club pick for February, so I'm not going to actually get into it too much here because I want to have a good discussion with the other people that have read this book. But I will say that I did really enjoy this like fake engagement, fake dating romance. Both of our characters are Indian, and I liked that we had the sort of family and cultural aspect in here, especially because they're sort of fake engagement because of an arranged marriage situation. Like they're not actually married yet, but they were set up. And I did really like the characters so much. Like individually, Meghna and Karthik are amazing. Like I really loved that. The reason it's a 4 instead of a 5 is that even though it has one of my favorite tropes, which is fake dating or the fake engagement, one of my least favorite is miscommunication for the sake of miscommunication. And a lot of their fake engagement has them assuming things about each other and their feelings and their lives and never ever talking to each other about it. And so even though you can see both points of view, because we get to go back and forth, third person, but back and forth, I really loved the characters and what they're thinking and how they're feeling about each other, but they always assume the opposite of each other, and it got to a point where I was so annoyed with it. So we're gonna leave it at that. I really do think this was a really good romance. I sped through it on the days that I was able to actually read, but that one thing was just getting to me. Okay, moving into my 4.5, I have Prince Charming by Rachel Hawkins. I was so happy to be able to read this in the month of February because I had it on my TBR in January, didn't get to read it then, so I put it on in February. This was another one that I was really able to speed through. It was just so easy to read. It's a 4.5 though, because I just never got that feeling that it was a 5. I think part of it is because there is sort of a romance in here, but we again never really got to experience the whole thing of it. It was just all of a sudden the character realizes that they're in love. Like we never really got the romance part of it, but the rest of the story about our character who is like 16 or 17, gonna be going into her senior year of high school, and her sister is like betrothed to a prince, and so now she is taken into this sort of like media frenzy because of that. Like it's nothing that is her fault whatsoever, but because her sister is potentially going to be a princess, like she is now in the public eye and having to learn the like do's and don'ts of being around the royal family. Like I really did like that idea, and I liked the characters a lot. A little bit of this was a little bit predictable, but at the same time I just wanted a little bit more from it. But overall, for a YA contemporary, because I wouldn't necessarily say it's a YA romance, I really did enjoy this one. And this was a gift from Jess, so thank you so much, Jess, because I did really enjoy it. Okay, then we're going to move into my 5-star reads. So the first one I have here is Fence Volume 4 by C.S. Picot. So this is the 4th volume in the Fence series that I started forever ago, like back when they were in individual issues, and I've been absolutely loving it. I need to finish this series because I feel like there's a volume 5 and a volume 6, and I think that might be it, at least for now. But I really like the fact that, at least in these comics, you really get into the actual, like, fencing rules and strategies. And so it's not just characters going about their lives. Like, the sport aspect is very much at the forefront of this book, but then we do get the characters and the relationships, and it's very LGBTQ. Like, I really love the art style and how these things are portrayed, like just being able to like see the like action of them. And this one specifically takes us into like sort of how a team fencing match works. Like, the team is because they all have to do stuff as a team, but it is still individual bouts, and so I really liked how that worked and how we got the explanation for it in here, because I've never like seen that in real life. Then my next 5-star was my nonfiction. Sort of surprising for me, just because I don't really read nonfiction very much, but it was also a graphic novel, and it was Sensory Life on the Spectrum, edited by Bex Allerton. And this was a collection of like 40 or 50 different short stories slash informational guides all about being autistic, and these were all done by people who were autistic, either early diagnosed or late diagnosed or self-diagnosed, and I really liked the idea of this and the execution of it as well. There are so many different artists because it is a graphic collection. Not all of the art styles were my favorite, however, everybody had something to say that I feel is very important. Like I said, some of these were like informational guides of like, here is what this means for being autistic, or here is what these symptoms mean, or that kind of thing. And then a lot of it was also personal experiences. So like, not just like, this is what this means, but I am autistic and here was my experience in high school, or here was my experience being diagnosed, that kind of stuff. Like, I really loved that. And I actually read this in the best books of booktubers vlog sort of thing. Again, I will leave that link down below, because of Ren from the Reading Ren, and I just really appreciate that they were able to bring this to my attention, because it's something that I had never heard of before. And something that I did mention in that vlog as well is I do feel like myself and my son are on the autism spectrum, and so being able to read this and really see a lot of personality traits and symptoms that these people were having from early in their lives match up with things that I know happened to me and made me feel like that is a possibility, has cemented it in my mind even more. And so I just really, really loved this one. My next 5-star read is The Weeping Tide by Amanda Foody. So I actually did continue in the Wilder Lore series. This is book 2. I got more used to the narrator, I will say, in this second book. Still not my favorite, having such a deep voiced narrator narrate a 12-year-old, but this was definitely better. I think part of it was that we were more in the world. We didn't have to like come into it brand new, so they were able to expand the lore and the magic and stuff happening a lot more. I did predict the like stuff that happened near the end, but in a good way. Like, it was just like great foreshadowing for what was happening. And this one deals with Barkley and his friends and his new mentor going to like the sea lands, because in this Wilder Lore series they have different Wilder lands and each one has like a different climate and things like that. And they're dealing with the fact that one of the legendary beasts has been coming up and attacking islands here, and so they're trying to figure out why that's happening, because it's not something that should be happening. And I just really, really loved the character relationships and the friendships and the action, the adventure. And like I said, I'm getting used to the narrator now. I already have book 3 requested from the library for audio because I need to continue with the series. I think book 4 comes out this month sometime too, and then there is going to be more in this series, but book 4 is going to be the new one. So I'm going to be caught up very, very shortly. Now, I have 2 books left for 5 stars, and I literally cannot pick between them. They have such different vibes, but such things that I love. I'm gonna just do them in order of when I read them. So I'm gonna talk about the first one that I read in February 1st, and then the second one that I read in February 2nd. But just keep in mind that I actually have both of these as my favorite, because they're different genres, different vibes, just wholly different, but both in such a good way that I literally cannot pick between them. So the first one I have here is The Long Way to a Small Angry Planet by Becky Chambers. This was my book club pick for January that I ended up starting at the end of January, and it just continued into February because of the fact that this one took me a while to read. Not in a bad way, but in a way that I just really needed to savor everything that happened, because it's not like a super huge book or anything, but there was so much to this that I just needed to not try and like rush through. And I absolutely love this one. We have like whole cast of characters on the Wayfarer ship that are like coming together. It's a found family sort of thing, and because it is a sort of slower paced book, like we technically have a plot, but like most of this book I forgot where we were actually going with the plot because it took them forever to get from like, oh, here was the time we talked about what was going to happen, and then near the end we finally got to like, okay, here is the actual plot for it. So a lot of this was like different scenes with these characters and experiencing their families and their friends and like why they were here on this ship. And we have a whole host of different alien species, and every so often we would have like emails or newscasts like near the end of a chapter that just again open up the world and give us more information. And so this was one of those things where I just like found myself really enjoying reading about these characters. It is very LGBTQ. I really just liked the sort of slow-paced nature of experiencing this world with these characters, and so it is very sci-fi, LGBTQ, like found family. I have heard this before talked about, like a mix between like Mass Effect and Firefly and stuff, and I really do love those comps for this because those are things that I absolutely love, and I did feel that love for those kind of things happen in this book. I really want to continue because something happened at the end of this book that opens up the second book. Like they're not, I don't think, like direct sequels where like all of these characters are going to be the exact same main characters for book 2. It's at least bringing in some other stuff that I'm very excited to read about. And so yeah, this is definitely one of those books that I feel like some people are going to love or hate because of how slow and character focused it is, but this one I think cemented to me the fact that I really love a character driven story more than a plot driven story with not so good characters. And finally, the other favorite that I had for this month that I needed to talk about is Role Playing by Kathy Yardley. So this is another one I talked about in that vlog that I mentioned, and I absolutely love this one. This is an adult romance that is like the epitome of friends to lovers because they become friends in this book first and then eventually have that relationship. It is such a slow burn because of that friends to lovers aspect, and I just really loved it. And this has two characters who end up meeting because of like an online MMO sort of game, and there is a sort of misunderstanding at the very beginning of this when they're talking to each other. Basically, they're both in their like 40s or 50s, and our main female character knows that the guy that runs the guild she's in is in community college. So she just assumes he's like 18, maybe 20 at the most, and then he knows that this woman has joined his guild through a friend of his mother's from church, and so he's assuming she's like 80. So he thinks she's really old and she thinks he's really young, and so I think that's part of the reason the friendship aspect starts first. But this was an instance of miscommunication that I actually really liked because it was humorous and it wasn't very long. And then we really get into the friendship aspect. I will also say I love the fact that this is a male-female romance, but it is LGBTQ because our guy is bi-romantic and demisexual, and I really love the way that they talked about the identities in this book. The writing was really good. Like, I need to read more from this author. Like, it was just very sweet. It's one of my favorite romances. Like, it was just so immaculate. Like, I loved it so much. But again, the vibes are completely different than The Long Way to a Small Angry Planet. So even though I love them both, I really cannot pick between them because they're just so different. And so that is going to be everything for today. If you guys like this video, give it a thumbs up to let me know. Subscribe to this channel if you'd like to see more videos. I do have videos coming out Tuesdays, Thursdays, and sometimes Saturdays, so I will see you then. Bye!